Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode. It is 11:34 a.m. and the inspiration for a talk of some sorts has arose in some sense. So, the title is "Ride of a Lifetime," and I want to speak about what it really means to journey through existence. And when we think of a ride of a lifetime, someone might think, like, is this a roller coaster ride, Mr. Within? Is this like a taxi ride of a lifetime, Mr. you know? But it's in actuality what Mr. Within is considering your existential journey and your exist from the moment you are a manifest intelligence in a waking reality. That's when things become very fascinating. When one kind of realizes they are being the process of evolution, they are being changed as the world is changing. Now, when you change before the world, you in some sense adjust to reality. Like there's two dynamics that arise in my mind. Either the world changes before you do, in that case you feel death. Either you change before the world does and you feel the world dies into you. There's a difference. There's a difference between how experience weaves its last story on this earth. There's a sort of uniqueness in intelligence that stops itself and intelligence that is stopped. There's a difference there. There's this very nice Sufi story. I want you to think of kind of like a caravan in the desert kind of situation. This caravan eventually gets to some village, and there's a businessman, there's a merchant. There's this merchant with his various horses and cargo, and eventually he gets to this village, this remote village, and he stops there to kind of rest. And back in the day, people were much more open, so he goes to see what's going on in the village and town and stuff. Nowadays, businessmen are not seen as good people, you know. But back in the day, when a caravan went to the village, the caravan would also give certain provisions to the village and whatnot. It would sell as they would go. But anyways, so what happens is this merchant kind of gets into this village, and he goes to talk to the townspeople, and eventually one of the townspeople says, "There's this very enlightened person here. You have to go talk to him." You know, and so he's like, "Why not?" Why not? It's good business. So he goes, and he's actually curious, honestly curious, and he goes, and he suddenly realizes the address they gave him is like the poorest house on the street. Literally, this house's door could be said to be just tree bark or something. Like the house, the house uh, was a very poor house. Anyways, the merchant goes, and the merchant's well dressed and all this, and he knocks. And as he knocks, the door opens, and this Sufi dervish in the traditional Sufi garb kind of like visits him, meets him. at the door, and the Sufi welcomes him in and says, "You're a traveler. You've gone far. Please come in and have tea." And so they invite him for tea. Now the merchant is sitting in this guy's house. There, the guy's setting up the kettle and whatnot, and suddenly there is this kind of astonishment. Suddenly the merchant notices, he's like, "Oh my God, this man has no furniture. This man has nothing. You know, there's only a mat, a lamp, and like the tea." Okay, and so this guy is kind of shocked, this merchant, and he looks at this Sufi dervish who's quietly drinking the tea as they're there. You know, and the merchant looks at the dervish and says, "My dear, you know, Sufi wise man, why? Where is your furniture?" And this is where it gets really intense in the story, because the response the dervish gives is very strange. The dervish looks at him very intensely, very chaotically, and says, "Where's your furniture?" Like, just shouts at this guy, at this merchant. The merchant feels a sort of kind of the merchant feels some sort of like kind of shock, you know, aftershock or something. And the merchant looks at the dervish and says, "Where's my furniture? I'm a traveler here. What do you mean? I'm a traveler. What do you mean, where's my furniture?" And that's when the Sufi looks at him. The dervish looks at the wise man looks at the merchant and says, "So am I." And there's a kind of like couple seconds of silence until suddenly the guy realizes that the implication of the story, what the Sufi dervish was saying, that he's a traveler in conscious existence. That means he has a sort of grasp of a sort of deeper identity that is not bound to the conditions. It moves through the conditions. It is like the self of selves that could never be inhibited. So the moral of the story was that the acknowledgement of the moment of existence becomes like a journey. And now, you know, I'm saying this in 2019. Which means this idea that we're just a traveler, the sophistication it bears has to do with the responsibility to the civilization. You know, on some level, Mr. Within considers that, believe it or not, many of our, like every living phenomena, its intelligence has an attributeless element to it because it finds itself in a field of intelligence. You know, there's been times where I felt from like the core of the universe, there are certain signals. Like I felt like we are waving and wavering in existence, you know. I felt like consciousness needed to be defined to be acknowledged. It took me a while to realize there's something attribute. Let's imagine like somebody looking for a needle in the haystack and suddenly realizes the whole haystack is the needle. Like, it's like something like that. The reason I chose this picture, because this man in this picture, I have no idea who drew this artwork, but it's a very phenomenal image because it shows the feeling, the emotion of sometimes life passing you by, or in some sense, life just transitioning into its next phases. The thing is, we assume that we need to understand everything about our life, which gives us a huge burden of knowledge. This is kind of like the story of Atlas in Greek mythology, where this kind of being had to carry the weight of the world every day up a mountain, and then eventually he'd get up the mountain, and it's a bit strange, the story, like his liver would be ate by some eagle, and he'd have to like kind of like the whole thing would fall down and he'd have to start again. And so that notion is very important because we look at Greek mythology and we're like, wow, cool stories they used to tell each other. And then, but that's not the case. Sometimes stories were the only means of communicating actual knowledge. Okay, sometimes it's like science has too much of a demand on history's accuracy. One of the most I find important questions for philosophy is it has to do with a sort of determination of intelligence, and has to recognize, we have to in some sense see where the how would I say it? Pretty much the idea is like whether the illusion should be kept or the truth should be found. You see, there comes a cost to truth. Sometimes when you go looking for truth, your past truths break. And when I look at civilization and I wonder how much the average human being needs to study their consciousness, it's not that everybody should go into like India and meditate in some cave. I'm not advocating that. For me, there's something more. It's like all those people who went to India and who went into that cave eventually realized there's a sort of full circle to things. The person at first cannot confront their moment of reality. They try to escape it. They think physically they have to escape it, so they go on some sort of pilgrimage. But eventually, as they go physically, they realize the issue was an internal issue. And this is the unique thing, that sometimes external conditions cannot handle your inner issues. This has to come through an acknowledgement of a sort of inner life and outer life. This inner life and outer life are codependent. They're like night and day, yet their distinction is very important. Their distinction is so important because there will be moments where you could be. I've experienced this personally. Like I've been around the most joyous crowd, the happiest people, and yet there was a despair. There was a despair in the back of my kind of intuition. You know, there's been moments where I've, in some sense, been with the most. How can I tell you? Like a room full of hatred. You know. Sometimes I speak too much, so some audiences feel a bit like they have to respond. But I'm saying there's been situations where, in some sense, I've been in hell, but I've internally been in heaven, and externally I've been in heaven, and internally I've been in hell. And these are just words I'm using, not imagery. For me, it took a while, but eventually I kind of woke up from that slumber of language. You know, I was a kid kind of raised in an environment where metaphysical ideas did not wait to enter my ears. Sometimes I wondered why did I hear certain deep notions on existence early? And for a while I felt that was a disservice of my environment. The fact that to bring the notion of existence to a person who has not even studied existence well. Um, what I mean by that is the implications of thought. You see, when you give someone imagine a thought was like um, like a letter, you know. When you give this letter, it's not just the letter that has a meaning that is given. It is also the content of the letter. So many children are opening their eyes to this world, and waves of various forms of data are hitting them, and their success really lands in how they can assimilate it. But in some sense, their assimilation process, how a child processes data, in some sense, is it cannot be controlled. That's the beauty of nature. That's the edge of knowledge. You see, our educational systems are based on what is known. Therefore, we don't generate enough explorers, and knowledge slows down in the language that is accepted too soon. It's a very fascinating idea, because many people might not know this, but the concept of a language, one language for one country, that was a nationalistic effort. That means we sometimes undervalue how much politics has had an influence on the evolution of consciousness. The fact that human beings went into some tribal dynamic, the fact that human beings suddenly started to that they understood their survival together was more there was more of a potential than being separate. It's very fascinating because you got to not only study how the world moves your eyes, you got to also study how your eyes move the world. And that's when the value of a ride of a lifetime comes into position. You know, when you suddenly become aware of the factors that influence attention. For me, it was like the question was not of output, it was of input. What that means is I was like, I find this is the main question any student of any kind must ask. And that is not what is being taught to me, but where is what is taught going? There came a moment where I wondered, okay, we're talking about knowledge, intelligence, where is all this happening? I've had moments where it's my it's like I playfully say, like, you know how some people suddenly see something and they're like, what the fuck? Like, excuse my language, but people use that, you know. And so I've had moments where I felt as a soul I've been saying what the fuck, like when I've wondered about the display of existence. And the simple reason is that we find ourselves in constant simulations, that a vast percentage of that simulation is self-generated based on how experiences have allowed our intelligence to even see value, you know. A person who's had a tree fall on them, or someone, or some situation like that, they have a different view of a tree than someone who's never like had any sort of disturbance with a tree. You know, it's like this is why children are kind of, I felt religion had to kind of imply. Sometimes when I wonder why did the revelations of the Abrahamic religions find the ears of man? I wondered why that sort of language was preserved through time. You see, on some level, sure, you can say the religion, the tenets of the religion, the ideology of the religion is like it has a sort of secret conception to it, sort of inconceivable to the mind of man, but the will of God knows before man does, kind of situation. But when we look at just the notion of language and how it is assimilated in the moment, then the relationship changes. You know, the way you define yourself is how your definitions are alive. This is so important to know because the notion of self and other is codependent. What that means is who you think you are right now has to do with what you think the world is. And a lot of the world is being told to the person is not experiencing it. Our experience as an average person on this planet is becoming limited. It is being consumed. Think of it this way. Imagine um, this world is filled with systems, and systems exist as much as there's an attention to maintain that system. There's some sort of energetic continuity. Many great philosophers have contributed to the study of language. Because language is what is there prior, is the substratum of any story, metaphysical or physical. Sometimes I wondered, why is it that religious thought is expanding, like at a like very, how can I tell you, like as populations are increasing, there are more people to become religious. And so I've wondered about the expansion of religious thought in comparison to secular thought. And I've looked at secular societies, and I've in some sense wondered, what are they missing? And I've looked at religious societies, and I've wondered, what are they missing? I kind of consider my lifetime being in some sense kind of a child thrown into a theocracy. In some sense, Iran is a theocracy. It's pretty much, religion is the mouthpiece of the political system. However, I've wondered why religion has a value that any sort of scientific explanation does not. And I realized, because where the values are being received is in the domain of personhood. We are people. We are people, and because we are people, we have to wonder beyond just the physical. The physical is not enough, as if the man needs, in some sense, love in his life, needs work in his life, needs, for example, a sort of continuity of a legacy. There are factors. You see, life is kind of, society is designed nowadays where the wants exceed what there is and what is possible. And which means that most people, it's like, rather than letting go of what they want, they want it so much that they rather hold on to that desire in their mental, in their subjective realm, rather than let go of the desire in the subjective realm to find an actual way to bring it about objectively. What it means is, it's kind of like a childhood mentality. A child is raised in this world with a dependence on the environment. The child needs nourishment from the environment. The child also needs communication, you know? Something which is honestly should be taught in the educational system. The value of communication is, in some sense, it's misvalued because we have not understood the importance of language in the evolutionary phase of the species. It's like we don't realize there's a mask we're wearing, and that's why we're wondering why we can't see our true face. We have, in some sense, divided reality conceptually. There's a division here. Don't think everything is what you see. This was the greatest point. I was having a very profound metaphysical discussion with my brother and my father, and they both shared certain views on what they felt the metaphysical kind of nature of the universe was, how the universe is alive in some sense, in their eyes. And they shared this, and there was discussion about past lives, there was the discussion about an inconceivable collective nature and all this. But in my position, it was the unknown that felt superior. So what that means is, it's as if this existence of mine is such a tiny percentage of what is actually here, that any conclusion of this tiny percentage inevitably is the tiny percentage. So what I realize is that the way knowledge is made is that it is made with the humility of the recognition that the unknown is more than the known. Do you see? Just like how man built tools to, in some sense, and technologies to continue its survival, it also it also built languages and linguistic technologies to continue the presence of its mind. You see, your body is where the definition of the person is coming from, okay? Your attention right now, if there was a chance that it would also be non-local, that means you are your whole moment of being rather than just the various aspects of the moment of being, then the definition of what a person is will shift in the change of how the intelligence is being described. We have to realize there's this factor which is called, it's like something that's in human beings, okay? Any creature that explores reality will eventually come up with measurements and will eventually develop a sort of memory. So the whole point of survival is the endless exploration. Okay? When we even think of what immortality means, there's been people on this planet who've wanted to be immortal. It's very easy to see that desire. Like, you protect your body from danger. Why not protect your body from the ultimate danger, which is in some sense how time conquers everything? So we've had people, even Alexander the Great is known to, in some sense, want to conquer something, which in some sense, Alexander the Great was a great conqueror. He conquered many things, yet he realized he could not conquer death. And his final conclusion, if you guys know this about Alexander the Great, that when he died, they put him on a boat with his hands open. And people wondered, why was Alexander's arms open? Kind of a suggestion that even the greatest conqueror leaves empty-handed. And the philosophies of the modern world will shift when they acknowledge space as an element. We changed that. In ancient times, we used to. You know, there's been even attempts by many of the early philosophers to try to find, in some sense, consciousness as a unique element. Like, for example, in ancient times, before the periodic table, they saw it in the sense of earth, air, fire, water, and then ether. What the hell was this ether? This ether was space. In some circles, they considered that an element. In other circles, they considered it as the space where all the elements exist. Okay, so in some sense, consciousness in certain realities was seen as an actual elemental phenomena, but this element, kind of like an element in another dimension, you know? And in some settings, it was just considered as an attributeless awareness. My personal resolution, see, these talks are originating out of some mind. But how I have considered the origin of my mind, the mind of minds, you know, it has been firstly beyond language. This is why I feel the truth of nature transcends, it moves beyond the language threshold. The language threshold is a concept where I've conceived it in the sense that it is what cannot be. It's like what you experience, but you don't have anything for. Do you know what I mean? Like, what you experience, but you don't have words for it. You have no way of containing the truth of that matter. There are some things that are secrets that only your intelligence will reveal to you. There are some things that, once assimilated on an individual level, have nowhere to go but towards a collective comprehension. You know, I will be honest. When I first started this kind of like sort of deeper self inquiry of my existential nature and how even experience is present as a moment of being, this all kind of started. It started through a state of incredible preferencelessness. That means I felt, in some sense, life was too simple to be complex, so no complex inquiry or depth was a sort of requirement. That means there was no need to give any talk, there was no need to do anything. There was literally no condition that in some sense was defining how the reality is. Okay, and so I dwelled in this inner state of a sort of unconditional presence, regardless of how the personality animates itself, you know. And so pretty much for some years I watched myself as the sky of my world. But then eventually I recognized the conditions that the person is trying to escape from, they will suddenly snap out of the past view and suddenly realize they are opportunities. When you realize your mistakes, your problems, your failures, they're once in a lifetime. A problem that comes to you throughout the day, it's once. Once in that moment, life is animated in that way. And, and once you come into terms with your true nature is not an ideology. And so, when it's not an ideology, suddenly that makes all those spiritual seekers suddenly be like, then what am I looking for? And I'll tell you, enlightenment is another word for the mirror of existence. It means how the light in your eyes is being your moment. Once you become aware of the subtlety of how intelligence is here, you'll respect it. Sometimes a lack of respect is a lack of existential sensitivity. Sometimes the world burns because we can't see it, and it's burning in front of us. Now, there is a total. There is something that uh, how would I say it? It's when your intelligence moves faster than thought, you break out of your beliefs. When you realize the nature of your experience has nothing to do with how subjects relate to objects, and once you truly experience the objectivity, you will experience a neutrality. You'd kind of think of it this way: in art, when people draw, there's something called a vanishing point. And the vanishing point is how the lines that define the space and the dimension all come into a singular point. So the depth of the moment arises from one single point where it's the vanishing point, you know. So when you try to reverse engineer something, you come to that neutrality. But when you try to engineer it, you endlessly expand the dimension. So something that no teacher could teach and only the student could remember, could realize. And that's the content of pretty much how your experience has sculpted your context of living, the concept of who you are changes in various moments of your life because the stimulus of the environment and the ecosystem, like literally the data of the environment is different. You will be different in the environment. Think of it this way. Imagine somebody's on stable ground, suddenly the ground shakes, and whether they like it or not, their intelligence has to adjust to the data found in the environment. So one can say, regardless of who you think you are, every moment is a sort of journey into a wave of data. So for me, it was very fascinating because my emotions were being torn apart. My intellect was cutting up and boxing my emotions, you know? And that happened to a point until I recognized the emotional state of the being has to do with the alignment of the presence. So think of it this way: it has to do with how much the environment is creating you and how much you are creating yourself as a response to the environment. That's the unique condition we find in the sort of atmosphere of mind that this species has. The human species has a state, an atmosphere of conceptualization and the movement of attention that is very sophisticated. So let's think of it this way. Let's entertain the notion, the secular notion of Darwin's evolution. You know, in Darwin's evolution, we see that what is evolving? A creature of attention. The attention of the creature is evolving. And based on the ability of the intelligence of the creature to adjust to change, it will continue. So either you got to go with the program or you'll fall behind. Okay? But how would I say it? Let me continue like this. We can say evolutionary creatures all share attention. That means, for example, it doesn't matter if it's a human being, a Homo sapien, paying attention to a tree. It doesn't matter if it's a fox or it's a rabbit or whatever it is, a turtle paying attention to a tree. The thing is, we find intelligence to be the governance of, it's like there's an attention that can direct. You see, especially for human beings, we say free will. Now the thing is, our attention is aware that there is an attention, but the fox, the turtle, they are not aware that they are aware. Do you see the difference? They say the main thing that suggests the human being is different from an animal is the awareness to our inevitable mortality. That is an evolutionary ability to be aware that we will die, and it brings with it great a sort of great ignition to move at different speeds. That means the person who knows that the end is coming will live for the beginning in a way where it's as if the beginning could never end. Again, we are thrown into kind of the heroic the archetype of the hero. The hero was someone who was sacrificing the self for the collective presence. Yet the hero and the villain were just two people. For me, it's so fascinating. All the people I have loved and hated in this world, they were just people. People who I did not have the eyes of. And I've had moments in this life where it's not that all realizations are just beautiful and ordered and enlightening. There are some chaotic realizations. You don't know how many moments in my life the chaotic intensity of it was as if it was like a part of it's as if my mind had walked in a way where it had to just experience that part of the forest it was in. So fundamentally, evolution is suggesting creatures of attention uh, have evolved to a point where they're aware of their attention. They are so aware of their attention that they have concluded their attention has been created. And at the same time, they also, because they think they were created, they have the notion of a creator. And because they have the notion of things coming into creation, they have the notion of absence and emptiness. And this is why creation has become the truth. Because it is as far as we could see. Trust me, there are not just black holes in outer space. There's black holes in your inner space. And these black holes are the edge of conception where duality is the final point. You see, the witness of duality has already stepped into the portal. But the person who has not witnessed duality, they're still bound by it. You see, it's as if, think of there's this king of nature. Okay, nature, I'll just think of king, like a monarchy kind of attitude to this. Now, this king has given a command to his kingdom to follow its rules. So we find that in man's attempt to personalize the laws of the universe, it gave its ownership to an identity. It was part of the evolution. The concept of God came into motion because man's mind started to take ownership. And eventually it wondered about the ownership of the world. And the deepest cultural questions became the sort of ears of revelation. So for me, I am telling you, human beings, our purpose is not something that is definable. There are certain programs of nature that we are in. And sometimes when we go into culture and civilization and society, we will find we're in man-made programs. That's simply it. For me, I'll be honest. If you look at the how ideas kind of evolve in society, you're going to think that the idea from the point of reference is going to become an abomination. There is so much too much coagulation. You know, it's as if every person is kind of like a sort of uh, asteroid belts hitting one another, breaking and collapsing into various forms. Ideas are dying and being born all the time. And for Mr. Within this lifetime, it's a breeze. It's a breeze in the presence of the actual intelligence that is here. And so man's mind made man. And it is now moving. It is now moving. Where the children of the future generations, oh my God, I am so much more. It's like, trust me, just like how you could look at a pattern of something and kind of see it echo in the past, you can also see potential echoes of current designs in the future. And what that means is you can wonder how the unknown will embrace the known. That's kind of what death is. Life is how your knowledge is embracing the unknown. How you are a known phenomena, constantly, endlessly knowing things. Okay, that's just the nature of our design. We live to know. But death is when the unknown moves knowledge. And so any human being in this existential plane, in this plane of existence that has experienced the unknown move their knowledge before death, there is no such thing as death. It's as if they came and challenged the person. My brother is I'll share this. This is something incredible. My brother, I consider him one of the greatest novelists in existence. He has an incredible mind for stories. I have a twin brother, and uh, I'm not going to name him because I don't know if he wants to be be acknowledged in these talks. But anyways, he had this novel where he had this incredible character named Vecta, and this character was on a celestial level. It was like the prince of, like a galactic prince of some sorts. And so kind of like think of Thor, Odin kind of structure to it. And so it's as if that situation where Vector is looking at like the ultimate, the father, and he has to kind of go into incarnation cycles. And so Vector looks at his father, not as father. It's as if like they tell him to come back in 3 days, but he comes down back in 2 days. But these 2 days are like billions of incarnation cycles that he goes through as a being. And so the notion is the confrontation of the challenge that is the ride of a lifetime. Fear is meaningless. I'm telling you, fear makes no sense. It makes no sense. Fear is as an attack of your past self on you. And this concept might be strange to some. They think, how could my past influence me? You know, we have people say things like the past is past. How can the past influence you? I will tell you, your memory is your foundation for your eternal awareness. There is a secret to memory. Your memory and imagination are like the roots of the tree that are in a soil where the soil cannot be seen. So when I look at knowledge in ancient times, it was acknowledged as a tree. You know, the tree of knowledge. There is even some sort of esoteric thought in the Kabbalah about it. You know, some sort of, I believe, Judaic esoteric thought. Fundamentally, it is a relationship of nature. And so I am telling you, I was a person who was having an unnatural relationship with nature, and somehow through the turn of events of this lifetime, I realized that that unnaturalness is actually a sort of bubble. It's like we're looking from inside of the bubble and we can't see outside of it. Language is a container. Do you see? This was the core of magic. Some people think magic was like, holy shit, that dude moved like rocks, mountains, but that's not magic. Magic is some other factor comes and moves your attention. Now, this attention is being moved beyond your control. So let me tell you what I mean by that. Do you know how we say we see in magic, like shown in the entertainment sector, like on TV or whatever, as something to do with spells? When we look at the word spells and we see how children are taught spelling, we might even wonder if language is it's like an advanced technology which seemed to magic back in the day, seemed like magic. And let me tell you why. Because the words, there's this poet by the name of Hafiz, he says the words you speak become the house you live in. And sometimes this world uh, gives you shitty housing. Sometimes the ideas that arrive at you, and whether you think it's luck or not, it's just phenomena is moving. It's not just particles in space that are moving. There are thoughts in space that are moving, and these thoughts they are cruel. They are cruel because they are lifeless. What that means is an idea can burden you for a lifetime, and that's the tragedy. That's why I say there's a war of language going on. Sorry, guys, I'm getting a bit emotional right now. Because, guys, there are some wolves who don't howl at the moon. They howl at the future. anyways, I'll give you an example, guys. I'll give you of something tragic I witnessed. I in 2016 I went to visit my family, like relatives and stuff. A majority of them live in Iran. And when I went to Iran, uh, there was this family friend who was looking for work. So I'd asked my family to be a sort of driver for the family, you know. So, anyways, this person, in some sense, I remember I had to go to like a cottage. I'll say it like this: pretty much, I was in a car ride with this person for a couple hours, and when I was in that car ride with that person, I was like relatively not too quiet, but like that person was talking incredibly, and because I asked that person, "How's your life? How are you living? How's your life?" And that person went on to tell me that at some point in their life, they were in some sense condemned, like something very supernaturally unnecessary had happened to the person. That means the person was kind of like threatened or something esoterically. And that person suddenly his life went into some sort of chaos after that. Now, the reason I'm sharing this is because I think some things should be discussed that have never been heard on stage, like on the public stage. But on some level, what I'm trying to get to is this man was so convinced by words that had originated from another person's mind that they could not see their mind. So they were, in some sense, living that person's life because that person's words, in some sense, this is why I say this, guys. You realize this if you ask anybody who hears my talks or knows me, what I'm saying primarily to people to do is find a mirror as soon as possible. My effort in these talks is for it to be a mirror, because we have no choice to be but for the species to evolve through a more advanced tribal dynamic, but at the same time there comes the collision of various ideas of various minds. This collision of various ideas and minds means you're in a sort of battlefield of ideology. That means many ideas are fighting for your attention. Now you have to choose whether you want your ideology to be based on your direct experience, what you momentarily kind of see, like how much you value your personal dimension and how much you value the impersonal. You value the impersonal too much, you listen to others too much, you will forget that you have a free will. And you'll be lost in nostalgia. You'd pretty much be that person who's working in an inefficient system and wondering when the efficiency will come. When we look at, for example, revolutions and rebellions in our history, for example, the French Revolution, uh, for example, I'm Persian, so the Islamic Revolution, when we see revolution occur, revolution is occurring because a big change is in sight. Now, how that change will be changed is a totally different talk. But what I'm saying is that change arises when the opportunity for that change to happen is more than 50%. That means the system the past is in some sense breaking. And so a new present function comes in. When you look at history, do you know what you see? You see a people trying to own worlds. That's what you see in history. And you fundamentally see that these 8 billion creatures right now alive, these human beings, they all do require levels of ownership. But their ownership mainly is an internal phenomena. So it doesn't matter if that person, it doesn't matter if a king owns like a rag or a beggar owns like a kingdom. You fundamentally see it's an inner validity. The inner validity will seem to be unconditional. So I am telling you, your mind is unconditionally here, but your body is extremely conditionally here. And this is why I've kind of poetically said it like this: your body is made of earth, your mind is made of sky, made of the sky. Your mind, its edges are the sky. When you realize this, you will laugh and cry at the same time. You will cry first and then laugh. Oh man, I've had certain moments where I realized that Carl Jung, something that I think he couldn't say but wished he could, was that he did not want people to listen to Carl Jung, listen to him. He wanted explorers of the unknown dimensions. And this is why I feel a lot of human intelligence is being wasted, because it is only trapped internally and never is communicated. Imagine if I hadn't given these talks and how much of these ideas would have gone in the kind of stayed in the silence. It is kind of the responsibility we of intelligent beings. Mr. Within considers like the I don't even consider like I don't even like even though I speak about sort of historical references of meditative practice and whatnot, but I only see people as advanced communicators and pilots of consciousness. These are the only two types of beings I see on this planet. The advanced communicator is a being who their individual consciousness, their attention is primarily focused in their individual consciousness. The pilot of consciousness is a being that moves collectively. Those beings who move collectively, they automatically transcend their ideology. That means Lao Tzu has this quote where he says, once the leader's task job is done, the people will say we did it ourselves. Now that's where Lao Tzu's quote, let's say, stops. But this is what Mr. Within would add to that quote. You know, once the leader's job is done, the people would say we have done it ourselves, and the leader would have transcended his individual identity. I am telling you, there is no way for the greater dimensions of this lifetime to open up unless you confront and directly live this life. You don't fear how it will treat you, because nobody knows. Nobody knows how the future is going to treat us. For me, it was a sort of chaotic thing, guys. It's like, I've had people bring questions into my awareness of why I even give these talks. You know, there's been moments where I've kind of like felt that what is the value if it's an inevitable non-existence? I have walked in on many nihilistic bridges in this lifetime. I've had many moments where the whole system of thought, the whole personality of the moment has just cracked. Has just I have seen the death of self many times. Even in dream states, believe it or not, I've died a couple times in my dreams. And these deaths were very unique because it was the lifting of the veil of the material in the immaterial attention. That means once you study your attention, you will come to a point where this attention will be so found in the stillness and silence of the moment that it doesn't matter what movement your body goes through. At some point it will stop matter. It will stop. Like it wouldn't matter if the body is asleep or awake or active or inactive or whatever. We are creatures that are active for a certain time, and then eventually we slowly walk to our inactivity. For me, life is something where you are a guest. You're a guest here, you know. And as a guest, your mindset is to be involved as much as you can, and then the curtains are pulled. I really kind of adore the ancient um, sort of esoteric. I don't want to say esoteric. The ancient notion of God's face in man's eyes. There is a book that I consider anybody in the West who is interested in any sort of metaphysics. I really advise people to study the Bhagavad Gita. Because in the Bhagavad Gita, what we don't realize is that many of these scripture and sacred texts, these texts are in some sense conclusions. They are resolutions of historical challenges. It's as if the minds of the people were exploded into a new dimension based on that ideology entering at that time. You know? There's this very notable atheist by the name of Christopher Hitchens. He of course discredits. He thinks it's because he thinks religion is man-made. It's always funny when you see theists kind of try to convince him otherwise. You know, it's like pretty much he has this hammer where that argument kind of like breaks everything the theist says. You know. It's like the atheist says God is man-made, the theist says man is God-made. You know? Anyways, he says that religion was, even though it was a sixth century attempt at trying to comprehend this reality, it was also the first attempt at a sort of health in the medical practices. Religion was a sort of kind of approach. It was kind of like, believe it or not, the birth of. It was the birth of kind of like how prayer and sort of like, of course, this can be debated, but certain sorts of esoteric like practices. I don't want to say esoteric. I'll say religious. Let's just keep it in the religious domain. It was an attempt at many of the first things that now have grown into things. Like, for example, art was drawn in cathedrals, and churches were a very important point in developing even the community. You see, so it was a vast system. But anyways, what I'm trying to get to is that in one dimension something can be incredibly meaningless. In another dimension, something can be incredibly profound. You know, there's been moments where I've communicated to people where I knew the dimension they saw me in was not the dimension who I really was. And at the same time, I knew that they did not see how I saw it. Like, do you know what I mean? There is language is a bridge between people's inner realities. Honestly, they should like that sentence should be on T-shirts. We can't value thoughts because a thought's value is in how it contributed to every mind of the individual. And so the first thing the human being realizes is that its eyes are limited. When it sees its limitations, two things occur. Either it will, in some sense, trust the world, or it will distrust the world. You who have distrusted the world, anything, any moment in your lifetime where you have distrusted something, just know that you have also distrusted how your mind was being that moment. And this is why it is all about a sort of trusting the intelligence that is here. There isn't much we can say to something that changes all the time, you know. You must free the mind from the self that it never was when novelty was a factor. There is a sort of certain imagery that I share in my own poetic writings where I say it's like kiss the earth, kiss the existence of earth with ever-present eyes. And so that's a sort of comfort. I am telling you, your biology has to be managed because the thoughts you have on your body act as separate subconscious programs. So what you, believe it or not, this is kind of, you might think it's hilarious, but what the thoughts you have on what this body is are determining your health. They're determining its continuity. There has been moments where I've physically like injured myself, and in that moment of injury, I remember it was kind of like, this was when I was really younger. I was such a simple kid, you know. I sometimes, how naive I was when I was younger is like, I wonder how I even survived, you know. But what I'm trying to say is there are moments where life will break you in front of yourself. And if you can be an observer and recognize things continue regardless, then you attain mindfulness, and then you will cultivate momentum of your intelligence. I am telling you, if a person's intelligence is not something that they just like read books and you get it. It's not like that. It's a dynamic flow, which it's a built up. So think of it this way, that you're a creature with a mind, and before you die, just like this is a hilarious metaphor, but imagine like rollerblades, you're just roller like, or you're on a snowboard or something like, and you're going at a super fast pace, and the speed of your conscious awareness to change will at the moment of death determine whether you still feel a self is here or all is. You see, your mind, they say, they have this ancient saying where they say the mind is a lousy master but a good servant. What that means is your mind should be treated like a technology. You see, for example, man, if it's like Iron Man, you see Tony Stark, imagine like he creates a robot that serves him. Okay? That robot, we won't be like, oh my God, that robot doesn't have freedom. That robot is a slave to Tony Stark who made him, you know? Like we don't think like that. You see, we feel as if like the robot is meant to, it's designed for that condition, right? So in some sense, there was a replacement of external slavery with human slavery with technological slavery. That means do you understand what I'm saying? I'm saying human beings satisfied the same need, but through a different means. And so technology has become our greater limb. And we are in some sense kind of reaching into the vision and the structure of this world in like, how can I tell you guys, do you know why the mad scientist exists? That idea? The mad scientist, the inferior mad scientist, is the mad scientist that in some sense is building like a Frankenstein or something. Like, you know, that's the inferior. The superior mad scientist is just wondering what tools are at the disposal of the species and the evolution of these tools. That means technology, it might suddenly become something where we're like, we have to release these titans from their chains just to see how far the world could see, you know? So fundamentally, I'm telling you, there's this underlying, even more superior to any sort of story written in any book, narrative. And this narrative is that all human beings stand as moments of existence, in some sense, having to confront the unknown. We are at war with how the world is changing. Do you see? And especially linguistically. Like, what is this whole wave of political correctness we see in Western society? On one angle, it's great because it's showing human beings are caring for human beings. But on another angle, it is ignorance because it is trying to destroy and disrupt. It's like what many people think is like this patriarchal system that they have to collapse, is in actuality they don't understand in how many dimensions that patriarchal society is maintaining society to be even something that their subconscious considers a comfortable moment to even rebel. Do you see? So it's like the moment where it's as if there we have mythological stories where the son rebels against the father, and we have mythological stories where the father kills the son. Do you see? And so I'll share this. This is kind of interesting. You know, we have the father. We have the story of what's his name, Icarus, and his father. And Icarus, as him and his father fly, as they're in the air, his father's like, Icarus, don't fly too close to the sun. This is wax and like feathers, okay? Like, like imagine Icarus's father was like, Icarus, I have no idea how wax and feathers is making us fly, but still, like, don't fly too close to the sun. And so Icarus doesn't listen. He doesn't listen to the father's wisdom, and in some sense flies too close to the sun, and then finds himself, oh shit, finds himself to have to swim, the rest of his way in this life. And so I'm telling you, it is a sort of, there's that sort of kind of mythological kind of sense of fall, where the son did not listen to the father and it fell. Now there's a situation in Persian mythology, like sort of ancient Persian mythology, not too ancient, but like Persian mythology, where in the poetic writings of Ferdowsi, this poet, uh, there's this notion of this man named Rostam. Rostam was this divine, undefeated warrior. He was pretty much a human being who, it was as if like his karma was he could not be defeated in battle. You know, he was like a next level kind of, and he was like this giant kind of big warrior. Like imagine mountain size from Game of Thrones. And so what happens is, the story is that Rostam, he has a son, and his son's name is Sohrab, if I remember correctly. And so Rostam puts like some sort of emblem or cloth around like Rostam's arm or something, some sort of sign, symbol. And he goes back to war. He's a warrior and he must go and abide by his nature. And so what happens is many years go by and Rostam is undefeated. He is so undefeated, and it's been so long he's forgotten about his wife and his kids, and he's been so consumed by his action that he has nowhere else to go. He's kind of like being this undefeatable warrior in the arc of history. And so what happens is that suddenly one day this younger kind of warrior comes. And suddenly, Rostam suddenly feels like it's strange, as if the karma of his moment is different. He feels as if like suddenly a warrior has come whose sword is also held by other gods, And so it's as if they have this collision, this war, this like fight, incredible fight, and Rostam is shocked. It's as if he's seeing a warrior he never thought could exist at that level, right? So Rostam is in some sense fighting his most kind of worthy opponent. But somehow Rostam's pride and just might is just so superior that he defeats this opponent, right? And in that opponent, in the opponent's eyes, he sees this sort of anger. It's as if Rostam is shocked how the divine. In some sense, he was kind of astonished by how the how divinity could respect anger. So anyways, what happens is he defeats this enemy, and he's right when he delivers the killer blow, and Rostam thinks, I have won. Suddenly he notices something. He notices, just a second guys, he notices the sign, the same emblem. And so in that context, there's the notion of like the father's mistake of killing the son, you see. So in one story in ancient Greece, we have the ignorance of the son, and then we have the ignorance of the father. These are all archetypes, of course. Da Vinci has this epic quote where he says, I mean, it's ascribed to Da Vinci, but the quote's useful, so I'll share it. Da Vinci says, to develop a complete mind, study the science of art. Study the art of science. Learn to see. Realize how everything connects to everything else. In other words, kind of find a sort of balance between the hemispheres of the brain. And learn to see, learn to abide as the observer within. And then you'll realize kind of how everything is connected to everything else, as Da Vinci says. What that means is the interconnectivity of knowledge is in the same way where all the branches of knowledge are going to the same trunk. So let me tell you why it's so easy to learn things on this planet, because it's all in one place. People are studying in the sense of thinking like each idea is its own. Like for me, ideas have architecture. I'm telling you, language has architecture for me. I don't give language too much of a. I don't animate it. Like I have moments where the silence and stillness of the moment kind of don't need a definition. We can say any sort of experience has a momentary factor. That means we have to take into consideration how the moment is being accepted. And so it has to do with how the dimensions are divided in some sense. We have to free the world from the self that was never in the world we want it to be. It's very, very profound. Once you awaken from the linguistic simulation, what could be more divine than the presence of existence? There's a sort of freedom to nature where once you kind of wonder about the efficiency of your moment, you'll return to. You have to ride. You have to kind of flow with your attention. It doesn't have to have a purpose necessarily, but if it does, that purpose will inevitably value itself collectively. That means we don't want to just live for ourselves when there's something that's like example, like Edison didn't want, he invented light bulbs, but like he was like, okay, I don't need to be the only one who has these. Like Family Guy has this hilarious thing where they show Edison and like the guy in front of him, kind of his neighbor, like Edison's not sharing his light with his neighbors. I find that most people look at, for example, the Japanese samurais Bushido, and they kind of acknowledge, like the Japanese, at least I think this is universal. Many people understand that honor is a big factor in their cultural kind of program, you know, and this honor is the preservation of values with precision. But this preservation of values with precision has what aim? And so, what I'm trying to say is, was the honor of the samurai personally inspired, or was it based on a collective ideology? You know, was it based on a principle of the way life was? You know, Rumi has this poem where he says, "Out beyond ideas of right doing and wrongdoing, there is a place. I will meet you there." To simplify it, there's one moment of being. In this moment of being, there's an objective realm and there's a subjective realm. There's a real way the moment exists subjectively, and there's a real way the moment exists objectively. Every moment has this component. Now, the subjective realm is very interesting because the memories and the imagination of the person, they're like here, but in an invisible room. They're like designs in an invisible room. That means I can visualize, like right now, I'm sitting on my porch, so I could visualize like a canoe kind of floating in the air between the branches of the tree of my yard. But at the same time, when I can visualize that canoe, but that visualization it doesn't become reality. It's as if it's only real to me. So that's what I'm saying. It's as if our imagination and memory is like this private room that we are in. And that means it's an attempt in man's exploration of his inner reality in first considering what is the space like, what is the atmosphere like. So it's like the exploration has to not only be a good exploration, a great exploration, but the exploration has to be also um, it has to also be able to be communicated. In Tibetan Buddhism, they have this concept of treasure revealing, but it's not external treasure. It's internal treasure. It's as in the mind awakens at a value where nothing in the world, the body could attain. Like the body is it's a program of nature. What are you going to do about it? But what the mind is the opportunity of the body to be governed by an attention. The nature of this attention, me personally, I feel it comes to a sort of collective attributeless presence. That means it has nothing to do with the personality. That means deep within the personality of the person was the presence of all intelligence in one moment. Like, it's pretty badass when philosophically approach the nature of reality and being many branches coming to the same point. Again, the vanishing point of existential value is there's two. There's one is the unseen, but the other is the instantaneity of presence. It's as if the thought, when your eyes are open throughout the day, the thought of you and uh, what is the light that opens the world in your eyes throughout the day, like light is becoming language through biology. That means it's like the purpose of matter was for light to, in some sense, be the world of this materialistic creature. Sometimes I wonder if the intelligence of our evolution has to do with the incredible sunlight that is hitting the planet, not per se just something that happened on a bacterial level. It's as if the designs are like beams of the sun. The thoughts that come and go are like the light beams that find our eyes. Light is not something that just only the imagery of heaven needs to own, or the imagery of photons needs to own. It's one of those things where light is how existence is being mined. And once you hold your mind, once you really are present as yourself, you automatically just find your freedom. You see inefficiency and stop being it. Pretty much it happens on its own, though. The development of the intuition. So all those people, for example, in the New Age community who believe in synchronicities and kind of like the spirit of nature or the logos of the cosmos guiding, like internally guiding them or whatever. Let me tell you, that's nice, but the point of synchronicity is to take you to the ultimate mirror. Once you look in that mirror, it's like no longer thoughts direct you. You direct thoughts in accordance to how you're resonating with the world. Rabindranath Tagore has this incredible quote. He says, "I slept and dreamt that life was joy. I awoke and I saw that life was service. I acted, and behold, service was joy." A transformation of an individual direction towards a collective direction which fulfilled the individual direction. Live for the world because you can only do it once. That's the thing. You can live in this place once. I think that's the beautiful. That's where beauty arises in poetry. The temporalness of what is here. It's as if there is a magnificence to that snowflake in the morning sun, as it in some sense becomes where it has been, where it's going. It's very profound. When we look at what religion was, it was pretty much a collective being speaking to an individual being. Mr. Within is saying we have taken the revelatory kind of data and ideology into consideration. But in some sense, we are also seeing now the individual is even intellectually coming into the idea that if there was the development of individual entities, why not collective? That means nature gave birth to creatures, but why not give birth to fields of intelligence? And so these fields of intelligence, it's very fascinating. They become a sort of sub-dimension to your mind where you see the various ways the archetypes behind your eyes are pulling you. Okay? So think of it this way, in every moment you're being redesigned. Do you know that moment in Transformers where the car just not didn't transform into a robot, but the car kind of changed the way it looked from an old car to a new car? So with a similar notion that there's a updating that goes on. That means every day I go to every day I wake up, let me say it like this: every night I go to sleep, I just I just thank the day. It's this weird attitude that I have. I don't, not weird, but I thank the day, and I let go of who I was that day, and I sleep, and I wake up with a sort of attributeless novelty to the day, because ideas are as valuable as they actually are relevant to your life. Stress and depression is pretty much a person paying attention to irrelevant ideas that are unnecessary. Unnecessary does not mean evil and you should fight the idea. For me, this is why I realize if I choose to define my morality based on a story that is based on human character, then there will always be judgment. Then there will always be cruel punishment. But if you just look at life and see efficient and inefficient behavior, as if the criminal was like, why shouldn't I be a criminal? And the person's like, because this is a civilization that happens once after 4 billions of years, and it makes sense to be efficient about it. You did something inefficient. What do you want us to say? And so that's the notion. That's not a judgment of nature or character or anything. It is just a care for efficiency. And some people will say, then what defines efficiency? Who says what efficiency is? And we say efficiency is values that we have proof for. Values that we have proof that in some sense they have contributed. Do you see? That means, for example, the idea of compassion is not an inefficient idea. You know? It becomes an inefficient idea if it occupies something, but by nature, like being nice to others is not a bad idea. Okay? And so the situation is exactly how do we define the measure of the efficient vision for the whole civilization? It has to do with a process where the greatest ideas can be first extracted. That means imagine Carl Jung, this incredible kind of philosopher and psychologist. Uh, he spoke about the collective unconscious, but the collective unconscious. And if there is the idea of the collective unconscious, there must be the idea of, in some sense, the individual, the collective conscious, the collective conscious potential. Okay? So this collective conscious potential is like, imagine suddenly the species became one human mind. Not that all our minds were connected together, not like some weird sci-fi thing. I mean, in the sense that there was an efficiency in the smoothness and of communication. We fixed the communication of the species. We have, in some sense, freed the species from the past that never needed to stay in that long. It will require the development of a system that answers the question. And that system means a sort of collective idea sharing more than just how the internet is. There's something about the internet that's incredible. It connects us all, but there's something bad about it. Something in the way that even the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche kind of understood. You know, Friedrich Nietzsche, they gave him typewriter. He was sick, like he couldn't write it. I don't know. They gave him a typewriter, and his writings, once he was writing it on a typewriter, became cold. His attitude and philosophy and approach became cold, and I could totally understand why. Because the once you type really quickly on a typewriter, it sounds like a machine. So this dude was hearing a machine as he was writing. You know what I mean? Charles Bukowski is so badass. He says like he used when he was writing on a typewriter, it was like it sounded like a machine gun. Like that's how badass of a writer he was. But anyways, so Friedrich Nietzsche's writing became cold and in some sense heartless to some degree. So similarly, the internet is that. It is a bit cold and heartless kind of atmosphere. But the thing is that eventually it's inevitable. I just see like I live in Canada. This is an incredibly multicultural place. And you know what that means? That means various people with different cultural identities are getting along in the same place. It is like a rapid transformation of the cultural atmosphere. You know, it's like you see the future generations' adaptation to the culture, and you see the lack of the future generations. You know, I've seen people live in Canada as if they're not living in Canada; they're still living back from where they came from. Do you know? And so, what does that imply for the atmosphere of the environment? You know, we must not change the family photos of a culture too soon. It's as if like certain spaces must be preserved, certain gardens must have fences. Yet, eventually, the atmospheres will move towards a sort of global community. This global community will be a kind of coliseum of the greatest ideas, where humanity is wondering about how quickly the institutions that govern humanity are updating in comparison to the mind of the individual. Only if our attention moves away from the past we can experience the future. Somebody who is, if you, I'll bet you this, anybody who has stress and depression ever, if there was no concept of time, their stress and depression would not exist. Only because they have a sense of past, their stress and depression exists. There's many ways you can be alive on this planet. Not all of them have to do with a sort of conceptual cultural program or something. Your eyes are free, which means your mind is free to design. And when you acknowledge life as a designer, the stories don't dictate your emotions. The stories of life don't move your emotions up and down too much because you're first looking at the design of the data. Because fundamentally, there's an observer present here. And that's what intelligence is. Your free will, what you're calling you, is a present moment of intelligence. Like how surprising is that? You know, how surprising is free will? You know? Imagine even if your name was Will, you know, and you it's like a free will discovers his free will, you know. Free your attention through an acceptance of what you naturally are. And then the ride of a lifetime has been occurring. There's our intelligence is in a field. It's not particles alone moving in space and time. We are, our notions of space and time are very playful. You should take your ideology relatively playfully because language is not the point. Language is maybe 3% of the world, of what is actually here. Ludwig Wittgenstein says the limits of my language are the limits of my world. And that's so true. You see that what is it to study? What is it to become an expert in some field of study? It's just learning the words. All reality is kept in words when it comes to education. And that's the tragedy. It's kind of like a comedy and tragedy at the same time. It's as if students are, even though they're attending school and they should be graded on their unique expression rather than, uh, how can I tell you? It's like the eyes of the being are more important than what the being communicates. There's this Zen story. There's this man who has to get across this river immediately. He's walking for like an hour on the side of this river. It's a sunny day, and he's like, "Oh my God, where's this bridge? Where's this bridge?" And he's running. And suddenly he finds that he sees something where it's not a bridge, but it's some old sage meditating. This sage is so old that his eyebrows are like white curtains, you know. And so this sage is meditating, this old sage. And so this guy comes and says, "Hey, old sage," he shouts his name or whatever, like it's like, "Old sage." And the sage like slowly moves his eyebrows and pulls the curtains to see what's going. And the sage suddenly sees this guy wants to get across, and the guy says, "Sage, how do I get to the other side of the river?" And the sage is silent and still, and through his deep, profound meditative contemplations and profound insight and atmosphere of that moment, the sage says, "You are on the other side." And that's the end of the story, guys. It's a silly Zen story, but that's the end of the story. What it means is like you're looking for something, but you're already there. Like that's the idea. Thanks for tuning in. Much blessings and namaste.